Hi, welcome to Breakpoint Bridge. Firstly, breakpoints, as they're being referred to in this project, are the screen width ranges that are defined within media queries in CSS that allow for CSS classes to be conditionally applied when those screen width ranges are matched. So this library extends that ability into JavaScript. So in short, what does it do? Breakpoint Bridge allows breakpoints to be defined within SASS and trigger match and exit events in JavaScript. So without going too much into the underlying mechanics, how does it work can be answered by saying breakpoints are defined in SASS. They are listed in ascending order and passed into a mixin along with a unique string identifier. The string identifier is necessary to associate the breakpoints with an HTML element in the JavaScript. So there's an example here of how that works. So first, here's your HTML. It's fairly straightforward. In this case, we have one CSS file that is compiled, and I'll show that in a minute. We have some elements here, and these would represent the HTML elements that you would be applying breakpoints to. In this case, we're using jQuery to bind these events, and here we have the single dependency that this library has, which is called JavaScript Breakpoints. This is a third-party library that is being used. It's essentially being wrapped in order to provide the binding of the events. And this is the Breakpoint Bridge library. So we need to include the dependency first, then add Breakpoint Bridge. So here's the syntax by which you would add breakpoints within CSS. So in this case, we have a small, medium, and large breakpoint set. And so this is a convention that you might see nowadays for defining, say, screen resolutions by small, medium, and large. And here's the aforementioned mixin. So we include Breakpoint Bridge, we pass in the list, and then this is the unique identifier here, which will come into play later and allow us to bind to these breakpoint match and exit events. So I thought I'd mention up front here, if you notice, this large breakpoint is matched only to its upper bound. So each of these is an upper bounds. This one, small, ranges from 0 to 800. Medium is on top of that. Large is on top of that. However, there's no breakpoint defined beyond 1800 pixels in this case. So beyond 1800 pixels, this breakpoint would be exited. And you might be asking, well, what then if I need to define some CSS rules for beyond that? So that's a good question. To solve this problem presently, we're adding what's called an infinite breakpoint, and I'll go into a little bit later how that's done and how you should use it. So here's the JavaScript. Breakpoint Bridge currently only has one exposed function, so it's activate. The first argument is passing in the element ID, which we saw earlier. Then we pass in the, or I'm sorry, not the element ID, the unique ID that would be associated with the breakpoint list. The element is passed in next, and you can pass in a jQuery object or not, as long as it's an element. In this case, we've named the element the same as the unique ID just for consistency. The third argument is the handler for when a breakpoint is matched. And the context of this function, this, allows you to read in a lot of information about that breakpoint that's provided by the JavaScript Breakpoints library underneath. When you read in the name, that is the name of the matched breakpoint. So in this case, it would be small, medium, or large. And the final function that's passed in is the handler for when the breakpoint is exited, and it has the same context. So what can I use this? What can I use it for? So I've created 3 demos, 2 of which are similar. One is somewhat different. The first being responsive image loading by adding and removing CSS classes. So without going too much into the explanation of this, it might be more useful to look at the code. So the first example here is adding the same breakpoint list that we saw earlier, somewhat different number ranges, but that's irrelevant. Then we create an ID here called background image. So we pass this into the Breakpoint Bridge mix-in that we saw earlier, and then I've created another mix-in here which takes the same argument signature. This mix-in will iterate through the breakpoint list and pull out the key of each of these objects that are in the list. So in this case, small, medium, and large. It will apply this key to the background image element. So whenever this class is applied, then the background image will be updated accordingly. So as you can see here, we've created a naming convention. So the ID that's passed in represents the containing folder of all of the images for this particular element, and then the key represents the file name of the images, and we can see that here. So here's background image, and small, medium, large, and infinite images are in there. So if we switch to the demo here, this is represented by this element. So as we can see right now, the large breakpoint is matched. However, when we shrink the screen, you can see the medium was matched there, and now small. So how does this work? Within the JavaScript, we have a small function here. So again, we call Breakpoint Bridge activate. We pass in the unique ID for the list. This represents the element that's in HTML, and again, for consistency's sake, we've added a class for the selector that matches the ID. Then we pass in the handler for when the breakpoint is matched and for when the breakpoint is exited. And all we really need to do here is add and remove the name of the breakpoint class to the element, and then our breakpoints are matched, and the CSS rule for that is applied. So the next demo that we'll look at is on the surface the exact same behavior. However, in this case we are creating a element that has an image tag within it, and we're updating the source of the image tag. So this is very similar in syntax. In the CSS here, we are creating small, medium, large, passing them into Breakpoint Bridge. However, within the associated JavaScript, we are actually updating the source attribute of the image tag. And the convention here for naming the images and placing them within the folder that has a name that matches the ID of the breakpoint list is the same. So this is almost a little bit simpler than updating the background image, in that you do not need to write as much CSS. So it just demonstrates how both strategies can be satisfied by using Breakpoint Bridge for updating images relative to the screen size. So in order to allay some confusion about what this library is actually for, it isn't necessarily meant for solving issues related to responsive image loading. It can be used for other things. So the third demonstration is controlling a JavaScript process state. So in the live demo here, you can see that there's an area here, an element in which there is some animation happening. So this represents perhaps a area where you might not, there might be some processor intensive animation going on here, or perhaps it's polling something and it's not really necessary to display this on smaller screens, where it might be superfluous. So in order to demonstrate how this can be removed, or in this case activated and deactivated at smaller screen sizes, this demo was created. So again, going into the code for a minute, this has a very, very simple set of CSS applied to it. So in this case, we just have a disable breakpoint. So within the range of 0 to 500 pixels, this class is applied via JavaScript in order to disable that breakpoint. So without going too much into this, this is just creating the animation here. It's running on a random set timeout, and enabling and disabling it is handled here within the match breakpoint event handler. So if the name that comes back in the handler matches disable, then the process is disabled. Otherwise, the default behavior is to allow it to run. So again, this just demonstrates how certain JavaScript processes can be activated, or their states can be maintained through responding to the screen width. This could also be used in certain view layouts in which JavaScript is used to position things. Sometimes a JavaScript process needs to run when the application begins. However, if the screen size changes for whatever reason, perhaps the device is reoriented, that JavaScript process may need to run again. So this would allow an easy way for that to be reinitialized. So there are a few caveats to using this library that are worth mentioning as we wrap this up. So any limitations of JavaScript breakpoints are also limitations of Breakpoint Bridge, and provided a link to the JavaScript breakpoints library, and you can read about all the limitations there. Dealing with 0 and dealing with infinity, once you get the hang of it, it's pretty straightforward. As I said before, the first breakpoint that you define, the range is automatically from 0 to that breakpoint. So this is the upper bounds. What you don't see happening here is the infinite upper bounds that's added automatically. So when you create your range of breakpoints, be aware that infinite is actually being added with a high number, which would be beyond the width of any screen we know today. And that just allows you to respond to that particular range of breakpoints without necessarily needing to define it every single time. So in this case, 1400 pixels to basically infinity you can respond to as well. So why does this exist? The reason why this exists is I was creating these breakpoints and trying to figure out a way in order to read them into JavaScript, and I discovered the JavaScript breakpoints library. However, it didn't really provide an easy way of reading the breakpoints from the CSS, and so Unison came along and provided that, and So I've wrapped JavaScript breakpoints and used the technique from Unison of binding or assigning the lists of breakpoint lists to the head element font face, and that just allows them to be more easily read. And it's worth mentioning that the project Simple State Manager was a source of inspiration. It essentially allows you to use any media queries you wish within JavaScript. However, they're only defined in JavaScript. It doesn't allow you to define anything within CSS or have any sort of two-way communication. So that concludes the presentation of Breakpoint Bridge. Please contact me through GitHub if you have any questions. Thank you.